Welcome to the Create Smarter podcast. I'm the host for this episode, Kyle McNaught, and I'm joined, well, for the first time ever, with Colleen Cam, call Cam as we love to call her on the sheets and in our hearts, and Jake Steiner. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, Kyle.
Good. So, call Cam. A quick question about the podcast studio. What do you think about it? I know it's the first time sitting here. What do you think about everything we're doing?
I like the layout of it. I really like this wood behind us, and I heard that you actually put it together.
No, that
not
was a
us.
sturdy line.
I was told that.
That was Tyler.
Tyler told me you did it.
Tyler said, Connor and I painted this room. We're talking about stuff that's nonsense. No one can see any of this. But yeah, cool little setup, right? And stuff like that. So why we are bringing both of you on, I kind of have a segment in mind, or kind of a different type of episode. So if you're a listener or a watcher, let us know if you like this. But I wanted to talk about the reason why is almost the sense of what this is, or like the art of the camera. There's a lot of stuff we do that's insider baseball, but there's things that we do for our clients or our potential prospects and storyboarding and all that. And I want to just walk through why we decide or why we suggest some of these things. For the first one I want to talk about, it's a gimbal movement, or kind of using a rig called like a gimbal. I should have done a little bit more research about what it's called, but it's a stabilizer. Essentially what it is a way to kind of take away the motion of camera movement while you're kind of recording. It does a lot of cool things, and I brought both of you on to kind of discuss it from two elements. One, the videographer. Jake, I know you have been slowly becoming more of our resident gimbal or stabilizer operator. And Colleen, I know you've done a decent amount of editing, not just with us, but you've also you've had a life outside of here before, and you've done some pretty cool stuff with stuff like wedding photography, documentary, and then also when we produce stuff. Overall, I mean, tell me what kind of your appreciation of the gimbal, your appreciation of that. Why do you like the gimbal motion in that particular style of filmmaking?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like, looking at it through the videographer lens, it's the creative freedom. I mean, you'll get a great shot if you put a camera on a tripod and you'll get a static shot, but those static shots don't translate to much excitement, and that's the whole point. We're trying to tell a story when we piece footage together, and having that creative freedom to move and kind of work around your environment just really, really creates a much more dynamic video. And so I will always recommend the gimbal and a stabilizer in that sense.
And for me, coming from the editor standpoint, it's nice having that exciting visuals with some movement at it. It helps with transitions. It kind of just keeps things moving smoothly and keeps the story kind of moving along. And then also it's like it just makes the visual so much smoother, because you can have a good quality camera, like the iPhones now, like you can shoot so much great stuff, but just having it on a stabilized, smooth like device equipment, it just makes it like just that much better. So you can have good quality stuff, but if it's shaky, it's not really going to translate that well on the screen.
I find it interesting that you mentioned the iPhone and stuff, especially as all of us kind of have slowly become more accustomed to having a very well HD camera in our pockets all the time. We film more and more, and especially the stabilizing elements of iPhone and what they're trying to do to make it where your phone acts as if it's one of our expensive cameras and stuff. It's fascinating of what that motion is with the gimbal and stuff like that. Sorry, these bing bongs over here screaming their heads off are making it very difficult for me.
I'm sure you've heard me shriek a little while ago.
But Jake, you talk about the dynamic movement. Talk a little bit more about that. Like, explain to me what you mean by the dynamic movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's just excitement, right? Like, when we're trying to tell a story, you're trying to really capture the emotion of whatever the individual is, whatever the environment that the video is being recorded in. That's all excitement. That's different energy you can pull off of, and you just don't get that quite as much when you do have just a static shot. The movement really helps kind of give you that whole pie. You get a piece of the pie with just kind of like that static shot, but being able to move around, have that creative freedom, like I was saying earlier, to work around your subject, and it helps flow that story and just creates a much more exciting video. And when we are, making a piece of content to give to one of our clients, we want to be able to tell that story as well as we can. And having that movement keeps a viewer watching that story much more engaged, and retention-wise, it's much better.
So with the excitement, if we're doing something that's a little more kind of heartfelt or like slower, like would you still suggest using that type of movement? Or
Yeah, and we have the ability to whether it's we can even slow it down if it's more heartfelt and you're trying to pull that emotion. We can slow our footage down and stabilize it that way, and be able to capture it. It's like I was saying, it's so versatile. It can be used almost in any setting that you place it in. You're going to be able to pull something out of it, and in that motion, it just goes such a long way at capturing whatever you're trying to capture, whatever story it may be, and whoever you might be talking to.
And even if it's just a little bit, like it doesn't have to be like you could do like those dramatic like whoosh shots to go from one shot to the next, or if it is something that's a little bit more emotional, you can just have some slight movements. It just adds some visual variety and gives you options for, especially for me in the editing room. Like it's nice to have, you can have the static shots, those look great, but just a little bit of movement goes a long way.
yeah, and that's one of the more interesting things too, is how's an editor view these types of shots. I mean, on one hand, I as an editor, you kind of always like the static because you're like, I know what I got. Like I know it's there. I know what it's going to be. I don't have to worry about, crap, someone walks in the background picking their nose that I wasn't aware of or something like that. Like for the most part, you can kind of see it.
Yeah. So
you're more looking at the shot itself. When there's motion, you're always kind of like, all right, what is happening here? Like, do I have to not only know what the motion is, does this line up with everything else? At least for me, I would love to hear kind of what your take is on it. But like, how do you use this stuff with it? Is it mainly B-roll? Do you like it if it's something that is the primary? Or is it going to be kind of your full on, like everything goes underneath this gimbal shot? Or is it usually for you, like I like it to be my B-roll. I like it to help tell my story and build the energy.
yeah, I think I'd prefer it on B-roll versus like an interview. I mean, it's cool to have I forgot the word of those things.
Like a slider?
Yes, a slider. So it's nice to have, I prefer it more for B-roll, and even in, like you can use it on an interview, on a slider, but really I think it's just to kind of add more visual variety to what the interviewee is talking about versus having movement there.
Now, one way we've used it, Jake, I would love for you to talk about, is like how it helps to make subjects stand out a little bit more. It's not just the movement and like the environment, but like I've seen you use it in a really cool way where it does give that subject, by subject I mean the individual. Maybe you're talking to a tow driver and they're talking about their business. Why do you think this camera movement really helps do that as opposed to just a static camera or a regular camera on a tripod, just filming someone kind of doing posing? What's the difference with having that motion for you as opposed to just sitting there and let them kind of pose and a director off camera being like, give me the cool looks?
It's the immersion, right? Like that is what it is. As a viewer, you're watching it and you can feel that we're getting closer to the subject, and you know, whether that's metaphorical or physical, you are moving into the subject, and being able to, like, a tow truck or a tow truck driver, we'll use that as an example, being able to kind of follow them throughout their daily movement. You kind of give the audience a sense of, okay, this is what their day looks like. This is their story. This is their day. You just can't capture that the same way if you put a camera on a tripod and, sit it there. Being able to really follow someone throughout their day, follow them throughout their normal movements, just creates a much better visual story.
But you feel like you're there with them.
Exactly.
Yeah, but what if you want to show the technical aspects of something? I mean, say you had a gimbal right here and we're filming this stuff, right? Like in theory, me doing my hands, you kind of don't get to see the tight stuff that I'm doing with it. Is there like a way that kind of, what's something that hampers? Like if you were trying to do something a little bit more like, hey, I want to zoom in on this. So being static or handheld zoomed in, is that a better way to use that? Or what do you think?
Yeah, so you're saying when you are trying to get a variety of shots, insider baseball, like you were saying, we try to, incorporate hands as our, close-ups and try to cause, or create a lot of variety in the shots. Are you saying would I recommend using the stabilizer as a means of capturing those different shots, as like those close-up shots?
Yeah, you mentioned like, hey, it does all this stuff, but is there reasons why you wouldn't use it? It's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that there's limitations, but I prefer to use the stabilizer for the ability of not feeling restricted by an environment. Yes, where you're at right now, we could set up a tripod over your shoulder and kind of get that shot looking down. But there's something so much more magical about me being able to move right into your shoulder and kind of pull away off your shoulder. It just creates that immersion, like I was saying. But does it have limitations? Sure. And what you were saying is when you get that static shot, it's the guaranteed shot, right? Like you go back and you get ready for editing and you're like, I know I have that shot. It's dynamite, whatever. But it doesn't give you that same feel that you could possibly get with a gimbal or a stabilizer. And that's why sure, there may be a situation where it makes far more sense to put something on a tripod. But I think being able to have the ability to move around an environment, move around the subject, pulls that subject out from the environment that they are in.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to like do a gotcha moment or anything like that. I think that there's in times for it, there's times where it doesn't make sense,
Absolutely.
right? If you need to show something technical of like, hey, I'm doing a how-to, right? If I'm doing a how-to, the last thing I want is for a bunch of distraction motion, like movement and stuff like that. I would rather than be like, okay, here's how you pull down an audio. Here's how you turn this up. Here's how you do those things. So like, I think there is magical moments to it and stuff like that. But
there's a time and place.
Yeah. I mean, a wide shot, right? You wouldn't use like, if it was a wide shot, you really wouldn't need the gimbal. Plus, it wouldn't really bring anything to the table.
Yeah, I guess it's entirely situational because, if we're thinking wide shot and we're in a crowd situation, there you go. You kind of want that wide with the motion, gives you that real sense of the environment that you are in. It's entirely situational, like you said. There is times and place for it. Absolutely. And it is entirely dependent on what content you are producing in that moment.
And then from edit, like I don't always want every shot to be moving. Like I sometimes want things to be static. So like I was saying on Slide Ashore, you can have an interview with some motion, but like more often than not, like I kind of want the viewers just to look at the interviewee, listen to what they're saying, and then like so that it's easier to digest that way instead of like looking all around. You're kind of not 100% paying attention if you're looking around the room. But for things like a concert or things like like you said, certain times and places, it makes more sense and sometimes it doesn't.
And as an editor, would you prefer your videographer to come back with a bunch of static footage or motion footage in that sense? I know you just said you wouldn't, want one to be all the other.
Ideally, I would like both.
Of course.
But I know that's a lot to carry sometimes. I mean, it's great that a lot of the gimbals now, they're so lightweight and easy just to kind of like store honestly in your back pocket. Like the new iPhones gimbals, it's not Apple branded. But they're just so lightweight. Like my mom just got one and just being able to use them, like this is so easy. Like everyone can use it. But also at the same time, it is nice having that static shot just to kind of have the two. So ideally like both, but.
Do you get annoyed about, especially with the gimbal, it can be tricky because a lot of times like maybe you're moving left or right, you're not even aware of it. And as an editor, does that become frustrating to you because you're like, man, transitioning becomes difficult because everything's flowing the same way or they're flowing opposite ways. And I can't really transition this without the viewer going like, what the, just like a thing. Does that play a factor for you?
Sometimes it's like if I'm going left to right, and sure, it depends on like what I'm actually showing, but I wouldn't want, it makes my shot selection a little bit more narrowed down because I'm like, okay, if I have left to right and it makes more sense to go from right to left, okay, do I have a shot that sequences nicely with this to go the direction I want? I don't. Okay, should I shift this around a little bit? So it makes me think a little bit more, and that's where having the static shot also is kind of nice to have as like a plan B.
Yeah, it feel like, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but like if we're storyboarded out, great. Yeah, then we should absolutely know the movement. It should be pretty easy. A gimbal can be amazing in something like an impact story or a feature on an individual and like something to kind of keep the energy. I know like plenty of times you watch like the little features they do between sports interstitials of like, oh, let's talk about this. There's a lot of that type of high energy movement. But like you say, you do want a good combination of both. It can be difficult if it's only this. It's like, man, it never stayed still. It didn't stop.
I've definitely said that as I've been editing. I'm like, just stop moving.
Right. Especially if you're like, this is a great shot. I want you to focus on that crap. You moved. Oh, I missed this.
I've heard you say that to me a couple times.
Stop moving.
I absolutely, yeah. I think I do. I absolutely am a mover. Even if we do go like a free cam, like I still, classic hip sway that we always talk about that we do here. Always trying to capture just a little bit of movement. So it's definitely, I'm glad you said that. Like, it can be to a fault, of course.
I mean, more often than not, I like to have some movement in there because
Yeah.
a lot of times in post, I find myself keyframing, moving the shot just a little bit, just to kind of add a little motion to it, just to kind of keep that person's attention and just add a little extra something.
But
to
as
it.
an editor, do you want to do that yourself?
Exactly.
Yeah, you want to
When
control
I hear
that.
we'll fix it in post, I'm like, oh no.
You're like, oh no. Yeah. I mean, yeah, gimbal's fun kind of stabilizer, really cool thing. There's been a million things. I mean, watch any touchdown celebration at this point. It's all gimbal. It's all moving right there. They're running there. Really cool things. I think that there's a time and place for it. I think you got to be purposeful. Storyboarding really does help out. I think pre-planning really helps out of like, okay, cool. This is the motion we're going to do. Great. I can plan that out.
Yeah.
From an editor's point of view, it's some of the stuff where you're like, cool. I mean, especially with, we talk about stabilization and all that, but with everyone using their iPhone, I'm sure you run into that as well. It's like, hey, I filmed this. You want to use it? And you're like, oh, I know the iPhone does a lot of things to help you out, but from like a editor or a filmmaker or a camera or an impact story, like we don't use film. I don't know why I call it filmmaking, but like from a storytelling point of view, there are times to think like, no, I want it static. I'd rather do the manipulation in post-production with editing as versus to a camera operator doing that work for me, because the camera operator doesn't necessarily know this shot before I used or this B-roll story I'm trying to tell. I didn't need that motion right now, and I could have really used focus on this individual.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is a good podcast. I thought it's just like those little things we do where we kind of like, let's take a second to think about it. So if you as the viewer or listener has some ideas or questions or wants to follow up, and if you like this, we're happy to always kind of go through the things we're doing and why we do it. Plenty of little tips and techniques that we do here at 5 Tool that I'd love to kind of just break it down with the users, the specs, the operators, the techs, the brilliant people here at 5 Tools. So for Colleen, for Jake, I'm Comic Knot. Thanks for being a part of the Create Smarter podcast.